All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And a preliminary Purim Sameach. I'm going to get that out of the way because in previous years I have often done a lesson pre-Purim on Purim. This year, Sisterhood gave me the opportunity to do a pre-lesson on Purim during a Sisterhood program, so I actually get to talk about Parashat Tzav instead. Yay! Sacrifices!
Oh, I can hardly wait.
Yes, you can just see the glow of anticipation on everyone's face. Now, honestly, don't worry, the camera's not pointed at you. How many people would have perhaps used the weather as an excuse and stayed home if you'd known that we were going to be talking about sacrifices today? Maybe, it's not the part that usually gets made into the movies, but
We can be thankful for that.
we can. Although we talked last week about the idea of sacrifices as not being as grubby as people often treat them, and I'll refer you to that clip. But we're going to look for a different aspect in this week's parasha. We're going to be looking with an eye for what do the rules and regulations and rituals of the sacrifices teach us about interpersonal human relationships. Not about animals, not per se about the personal relationship with God, although that should certainly be a part of it, but some of the details of the sacrifices are teaching us things that if we're just flipping the pages looking for the narrative, we would miss. And so we're going to try and see if we can't pull that out. Sound good? Excellent. So let's get down to work. We are in Parashat Tzav, as we said, and we're going to start on page 616, which is chapter 6 of the book of Leviticus. And we're going to be in verse 17 to start, which is right at the top of page 616. And looking for a volunteer. Spare my voice, please.
Oh, okay.
Harriet, thank you.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons thus. This is the ritual of the purification offering."
All right. Pause right there.
Good.
Every time you see the word purification, I want you to say the word chatat.
Chatat.
Chatat. Okay? Because there is nothing more confusing than the English translations of the sacrificial service. Because one will translate it as purification offering, another will translate it as sin offering, or they'll translate another sacrifice as a sin offering, and this one will be translated as purification offering, and it gets really, really confusing when you're going through all the different translations. So the purification offering that JPS uses here is called the chatat offering. All right, now you might notice something about the word chatat, something that might be a little bit familiar, or if you look at the Hebrew in the verses that we're reading, maybe the Hebrew on its own might look similar or familiar to another famous words. Chet, right? As in al-chet fame of Yom Kippur, al-chet, right? It's the Hebrew word for a sin. That's why many translators call this a sin offering, right? So this is one of the different types of sacrifices that can be made in response to transgressions.
And it depends if you're an optimist or a pessimist. See, if you look at the negative, you call it a sin offering, you sinned. But if you call it a purification offering, it lifts you up, makes you better.
And if you call it a chatat offering, you're consistent.
It's all good. Okay. So this is the chatat offering. The chatat offering shall be slaughtered before the Lord at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered.
So the burnt offering we are going to call our olah. Olah. Imagine you're from Mexico. Olah. Right, except it's olah. It's the olah offering. That's what's often referred to as the burnt offering.
And is that the spot that's most holy? Is that what it means? It is most holy?
No, that is the sacrifice itself.
The olah is most holy, or the chatat is most holy?
The chatat.
The chatat is most holy.
Well, the olah as well, but at the moment we're learning the regulations regarding the chatat.
Well, it's saying put it at this particular spot because it is most holy.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's sacrifice it in the same spot, and having been sacrificed at the same spot as the olah offering,
the spot is the most holy.
You should recognize that by extension, the sacrifice is most holy just as the Olah is most holy.
There's a bunch that are Kodesh Kodeshim.
Right.
Okay, so it's the English that doesn't translate well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The priest who offers it as a chatat offering shall eat of it. It shall be eaten in the sacred precinct in the enclosure of the tent of meeting.
All right, so because it is Kodesh Kodeshim, because it is a most holy, as JPS renders it, sacrifice, it means you don't get to take it home in the Tupperware. Now there are other sacrifices and other offerings that people bring where the extra bits can be taken home and they can be eaten by anyone in a state of ritual purity within the Kohen's family. The chatat is not one of those, just like the olah is not one of those. The chatat has to be eaten while in the actual area of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. So that's the upshot of being classified as a holy of holy sacrifice.
So when it's inside, you're inside the Mishkan and you're offering this sacrifice.
You're inside the enclosure.
Right.
How many?
Because there was a screen around the Mishkan. So you had the Mishkan itself with the Holy of Holies where the ark was back in here. Put our poles on, and then you had the altar out front where the actual sacrifices took place. And around all of this, you had a screened off area. So when they talk about eating it in this area, they mean you eat it out here.
Now, so how many people would be watching this happen at once? Is it a private thing?
That's a good question. It's one I've never really reflected on. I mean, when it came time later for the Beit HaMikdash, where you had a much larger area and you had a much bigger opening, more people would have seen. What happens is the person who brings the sacrifice stands at the entryway to the, we below the below the visual range, stands at the entryway down here and watches it take place. This is where they put their hands on it or where they proclaim what it's on behalf of, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's taken here and done. There was a certain element of public nature to the sacrificial service, in the sense that, you were here and other people were waiting to do their sacrifices behind you. And the opening wasn't just like a little peephole, it was an opening. And so certainly other people around you would have been able to see into the precincts around the Mishkan to watch the sacrifice be performed. But it wasn't like they had bleachers.
And there weren't, more specifically, there weren't a bunch of poor people who might have eaten the remainder, except they couldn't, watching, available to give the remainder.
You mean it wasn't a place that the poor hung out hoping for extra? Not at this time, not in general day-to-day practice. People were meant to take care of the poor, but the sacrificial center wasn't the means for doing that. There were other commandments for taking care of them other than the leftovers. Now, for the other pilgrimage festivals, when people would come, from the Mishkan it was a short walk, but when we lived in Israel, it was a bit of a longer walk. Then people were meant to share their festival sacrifices with the poor and with the Levi'im and others who don't have any land or other ways of supporting themselves. But that would have been arranged in advance. Again, you wouldn't just have people schnoring around the Mishkan. Schnoring. Great word, yeah? Okay, Harriet, I think
So
we're...
in verse 20.
Verse 20, thank you.
Anything that touches its flesh shall become holy, and if any of its blood is spattered upon a garment, you shall wash the bespattered part in the sacred precinct.
All right, let's make sure, because this isn't actually too much on topic, but it's a point of common confusion. When it says that anything it touches shall become holy, what does that mean? Does that mean if I take some of the raw meat from the sacrifice and I touch the chair, it becomes a shiny, holy chair? I've lifted its level of sanctity and woohoo, I've made it holy. If I touch it to a person, they become holy. Sound effects are optional. What does it mean that it becomes holy? It becomes limited in use, right? It becomes set aside, exactly. So this is not like the way we usually use the term holy in casual conversation, and if you use the word holy in casual conversation, of meaning to make something better or great or wonderful. This means, whoa, if you touch that chair with that, that chair is now only fit for use within the temple precincts or the Mishkan precincts. You can't use it as a regular chair anymore. It has become sanctified. So this is essentially turning the sacrificial material into almost a dangerous substance. Think plutonium, that it can contaminate. It's a pejorative word in English, but it's the best one we've got. It can contaminate other objects, which then also become holy. And that means that you don't run around touching a bunch of things with it, because you don't want to lose things to their sanctity. You would be very careful with it, and you would treat it as a very powerful object, not to be just set down on a table casually, or not to just be dropped into pockets. But it is holy, and what it comes into contact with is holy, so you treat it with the utmost care throughout its entirety of its existence until it's gone. Does that make sense? Okay. So I just wanted to make sure we clear that up, because those words can be a little confusing in English. A bit of confusion in Hebrew, too.
21. An earthen vessel in which it was boiled shall be broken. If it was boiled in a copper vessel, the vessel shall be scoured and rinsed with water. Only the males in the priestly line may eat of it. It is most holy. But no purification offering may be eaten.
No what?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so busy about the males. No chatat. No chatat offering may be eaten from which any blood is brought into the tent of meeting for expiation in the sanctuary. I don't know if that's right. No purification offering may be eaten from which any blood is brought into the tent of meeting for expiation. Any such shall be consumed in fire.
Right. So there was a special subcategory that was limited, or that is putting additional limits on. And that's what that final sentence is trying to clarify for us. Okay. Spiritually uplifting stuff, yes?
Well, don't we get our rules, some of our rules of kashrut from this, about what you can kasher?
Okay, so the copper vessel versus the clay
ceramic
pot
plate.
is indeed, and 2 years ago, I think that was the shiur that I gave on this parasha, was precisely drawn from those sources, about the notion that this is partly what's teaching us how to kasher different things and what cannot be kashered. Which is why the earthenware vessels, we don't get to kasher those. If you have an earthenware jug that you've been using for milk your whole life, you can't suddenly use it for gravy, no matter what you do to it. There's no way to make it gravyable. Whereas if you have a copper milk jug that you've been using your whole life, almost certainly there are ways that you can re-kasher that and make it for gravy for the future. You don't get to go back and forth easily, but you can re-kasher most metal utensils. Please consult your local rabbinic authority. There's more detail to it than that. And you can find the handout online, but I don't think we have the recording from that class. Okay. So, kashrut aside, anything here between you and me that stands out? Oh, yeah.
Only the males?
What's that?
Only the males?
Only males. Well, only the males
Not
with
their wives?
Well, so for many things, yes. That is to say, for many other types of offerings and sacrifices, the wives and the other members of the Kohen's family can eat them. But those are things that are eaten outside these precincts. Whereas the Kohanim that are inside the enclosure are the ones that are actually able to officiate. And that is the patrilineal line. That is father to son, father to son. So a son can eat of it because he is part of the chain of Kohanim that will be officiating. Women cannot because they're not part of the chain of those who officiate. It's not anything bad about women, it's just they're not eligible for the job.
Fair enough.
Just like we're not eligible for the job of having children.
Don't.
Okay, so let's see if we can find out something about embarrassment from all of this. It's okay, don't feel bad. I didn't see it the first time I read through this either. That's why I study too.
When the person is offering the sin offering, Does he have to publicly?
You mean the chatat or the asham, which comes in the next chapter? Or
Yeah.
Which chapter?
the one we just read, the chatat.
Yeah. Does he have to publicly state what his sin was?
Hold on to that.
Ah.
Hold on to that public notion. I'm glad that you're taking us down that road because we're going to get there. But just hold on to it for another few minutes. Because I think your mind is already beginning to work in the way that our sages looked at this, which is, well, what does it mean to show up at the tabernacle with a chatat, with a sin offering?
Right.
Isn't that going to mean everyone's going to know
You did something.
you did something?
Right, that's why I wanted to know how private and public that was, the
Mhm.
ceremony, and what you need to say.
Very good, very good. Nikki, did you have your
Well,
hand?
maybe it's clarified elsewhere, but if they're mixing together, you don't know if you're bringing a burn or a hatat, or do you?
We'll get there. We'll get there. Okay, so how much would other people know of your business is going to be the major question that's going to overlap all of that. And I'm very glad that you guys are noticing that now that we just threw the word embarrassment in, you're already beginning to click. Okay, well, yeah, well, wait a minute, hold on. So we're going to start off with our great quote from Mark Twain. He's not Jewish, but he should have been. If you want to.
Yeah, sure. Man is the only animal that blushes or needs to.
Okay.
From Mark Twain.
Mark Twain, or could have been from the Talmud. The idea of shame, the idea of embarrassment is something that is uniquely human, as is doing things that can make us embarrassed is something that is uniquely human. Mostly. I've seen a few animals that do look embarrassed after a cat misses a jump or something, and looks around and goes, "Did anyone notice that? No, I'm okay, and walks off. Exactly. No, I meant to miss that bird. I was just toying with him. Yeah. But cats aside, pretty much it's humans that will do things that are actually wrong as opposed to merely blunders, and then feel embarrassed about it afterwards, or at least should feel embarrassed about it afterwards. One of the features that has been missing in the modern world is shame. We still have embarrassment, but we don't have shame. And by the difference, what I'm thinking is that we are embarrassed when other people see us in a negative way, and we're unhappy with that, and we wish it hadn't happened. And that's embarrassment for most of us nowadays. But that doesn't mean we actually regret what we did. So somebody who is caught in the parking lot with their mistress will be embarrassed that they have been publicly outed and performing these acts. Whereas someone who's privately in the hotel, no one ever knows, no embarrassment, no shame, because no one knows. And we're going to be trying to navigate the distinction between those, because we're going to see our tradition is very, very supportive of shame and very, very anti-embarrassment.
I think it's even worse than that today, in that your attorney tells you, make sure you're contrite and make sure that you're embarrassed in front of the judge so that they'll lighten the sentence, even though you don't have any of those feelings.
Right.
Act the part.
The public display of contrition is can be a legal tool rather than an emotional state, and that is indeed, shall we say, unfortunate. We're going to see even more, but we're going to see as well the tradition is extremely careful about embarrassment, about not wanting to embarrass people. We want them to feel shame.
Safe face.
We just don't want them to be embarrassed, and trying to navigate that minefield is going to take up most of our time today. All right, so Harriet, keep reading for us.
Sure. You shall certainly rebuke your comrade, and you shall not bear sin on his account.
So this is from what's often referred to as the Holiness Code. Chapter 19 of Leviticus, just a few chapters away, contains some of the most famous statements of Judaism, like love your neighbor as yourself, and it also contains this admonition.
From where do we derive that one who sees something reproachable about his companion should rebuke him? It is said, you shall certainly rebuke your comrade.
Right? Okay, so how do you know that if you watch someone doing something wrong, that you're supposed to say, hey buddy, that's wrong? Well, because the Torah told me to. However,
However, one might think that the obligation of rebuke applies even if the other's face pales. The Torah therefore states, you shall not bear sin on his account.
Okay, so this malbim panim, this paling of the face, is a usage, an idiom that's used throughout rabbinic literature to mean causing extreme embarrassment. We tend to think of people going red in the face when they're embarrassed, a la Mark Twain. But the rabbi said that it was even worse than that in many situations, where the person would go red and then the blood would drain, as what had happened really sunk in. As one of the rabbis put it, that the blood flushes to your face in anger, but then as you realize there's no way for you to use that anger, I mean, you're not allowed to beat the other person senseless, it's almost as though you die, as though the blood drains away suddenly and you're left weak and faint because of the situation that you're now trapped in this humiliation. So when we're talking about the face whitening and the face paling, we're talking about that sense of complete and total humiliation.
So that sense of the blood draining away is the same as if you had slit his throat and the blood drained away. It's like if you killed him.
It's exactly, and they use the term of spilling blood as another analogy for this occurrence. And rabbinic literature is replete with warnings and castigations against embarrassing others. And we're only going to look at a few of them and ones that pertain to our particular parasha. But this is the tip of the iceberg as far as the rabbis are concerned in their anti-embarrassment agenda.
Okay. It is forbidden to embarrass a fellow Jew, especially in public. Even though one is not lashed for embarrassing another, it is a grave sin.
Right, so if you go to the court and you say, Frank embarrassed me yesterday when we were having dinner in the restaurant, the court, even if it's proven true, doesn't have the authority to flog the person for doing so. They can flog them for lots of other things in different circumstances, when flogging used to be a common Jewish punishment. Causing embarrassment wasn't one of them, which is one of the reasons why the rabbis had to go to such great lengths to make sure that people wouldn't. You know, if you got the threat of flogging hanging over you, then you might think twice before you humiliate someone in public. Whereas if you know they can't touch you, well, you know, what pops into my head to say about this person in public might just reach my mouth without any second thought. But even so, as Rambam, who we're reading from here, points out, it is still considered to be a grave sin.
Our sages said, anyone who publicly mortifies his companion has no portion in the world to come.
Oh, take that to heart, what the rabbis are trying to say here. They've said in other places that every Jew has a portion of the world to come, that every righteous person of the world has a portion of the world to come. And here, I mean, I could be a thief and I still have a portion of the world to come. I could be someone who has cheated on my taxes my whole life, or ripped people off in business, or killed my neighbor's flocks and all sorts of other horrible things. But because I embarrassed you, I lose my portion of eternity? Well, yes and no. It's hyperbole, but it's hyperbole meant to drive home a point. That what you may think is of inconsequence is in fact extremely important. And the way we treat other people should be at the top of our list, not at the bottom. Go ahead and continue.
Therefore, a person should be careful not to embarrass a fellow Jew publicly, whether of greater or lesser stature. One must not call another by an embarrassing name, nor relate a shameful matter in his presence.
That doesn't mean you go around behind his back either, by the way. But specifically here, Rambam is dealing with the notion of embarrassing the person directly, not about spreading tales and gossip, which is another prohibition, but that comes in a different chapter or a different law paragraph. So, clear enough? Haven't seen much of a connection yet to our chatat offerings yet, have we? Okay, so let's move.
Okay, so Rabbi Yehoshua Leibdiskin, the 19th century Rav of Brisk, asked why the Torah said with regards to the lamb chatat that he atones for his sin which he sinned, but with the goat it just says he is forgiven.
All right, so in verses we didn't have a chance to go through and read, it talks about the fact that you can bring a lamb or you can bring a goat as your chatat. That you have a choice of these two different animals. And lamb here, we're talking about sheep, right? And a young sheep. whereas goat we would call a young goat a kid. And there's a slight nuance in that phrasing where it says that if you bring a lamb, that you atone for the sin that you sinned. But when it says you bring the goat, it says that they'll put the hands on it and offer it, and it will atone for the sin, that he will be forgiven. Why the distinction, says Rabbi Yoshua Leib Diskin. All right, so let's take a little bit of a digression in order to tease this out, to answer to the question.
So Rabbi Shimon ben Bar Yochai says, a person should speak of what is to his credit in a low voice, and what is to his detriment in a loud voice.
Thank you for modeling that, okay? So, right, if it's, go ahead and keep reading a little bit more to give an example.
What is to his credit in a low voice? From the matter of the declaration for the tithes, where it is written, say.
Right? So when you declare that you are giving your tithes, you are fulfilling a mitzvah, it is to your credit, and certainly by the amount that you tithe, everyone knows what you've got, because it's proportional, right? So a rich person tithes more than a poor person, simply by how much they own. When you do that declaration, you don't shout it from the treetops. You just say it, because the verb that's used in that passage is say. On the other hand,
what is to his detriment in a loud voice, from the declaration made at bringing the first fruits, where he mentioned his lowly ancestry, but it is written, say aloud.
And the extra word aloud is what they're using as an emphasis to mean say it loud. What does it mean by lowly ancestry? Well, this is my father was a wandering Aramean, or an Aramean tried to kill my father, and he ended up down in Egypt and sojourned there. That's not exactly, woohoo, what a glorious history. And indeed, everyone know that we're going to say that soon?
Yes.
The Haggadah, right? This is the traditional text that's used as the center of the retelling of the story of the Exodus. And it starts off from despair. It's one of the reasons why this text was chosen by the rabbis. It starts off from this notion of we were nothing, we were lowly, we were pathetic. That we should say loudly. That we should say loudly, according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
I actually kind of think this is very practical. Because if you shout out, hey, he just brought 1 million pieces of fruit, every schnorrer will be at his door, they'll all be wanting his money, the robbers will know where to go, and it's not a very good thing.
Well, the fruit's not there anymore.
Say it quietly. Yeah, but he could afford to do that, and he only brought a tenth, means 90% is still back there.
That's a good point, yes.
So you say it quietly. Because I was once talking to the kids in Hebrew school, and I said, if you're standing at the bus stop and say, did you hear, he just got a new iPod, and it's really fantastic. Somebody may overhear it and think they want to steal it from him. So talking about somebody, about even good things, you want to be careful what you do.
When you get the new flat screen TV, you don't put the box out in the curb.
Yeah, there you go.
Look what I got!
Right.
Or if you have a public Facebook account, you don't tell people that you're on vacation. Okay, but
right there from Shimon
and you're going to see for the next few paragraphs, we're going to have these exclamation points. That's my attempt to help you as the reader recognize that the next sentence should be read emphatically as a wait a minute kind of thing.
Wait a minute, should one really say what is to his detriment in a loud voice? Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say in the name of Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai?
Which means it's the same guy, so it sounds like he might be contradicting himself.
Why did the sages order that the Amidah should be said in a whisper, so as not to embarrass transgressors? Torah did not distinguish the place of the Chatat from that of the Olah.
Okay, so we're going to come back to that last sentence, but let's get the Amidah, right? The Amidah, the section of the prayer. Why do we say the Amidah quietly, each to ourselves, when we're in a group?
It's a private thing.
It's a private thing. It's personal. And among the things we do in the Amidah, not so much on Shabbat, but on the weekday Amidah in particular, we admit our transgressions. We do it in the plural. It's okay. We do it in the plural in the formal text, but we also do it in the personal in our private reflections. Remember, the Amidah is not supposed to be a straitjacket for expression. It's meant to be a ladder. And so as we add to the text in our own reflections, the rabbis were very concerned that if we made everybody say this out loud, that people would be ashamed to do it. or they would be embarrassed to say what they had done, and then they would refrain from either doing the Amidah at all, or from including in the Amidah their requests for forgiveness. That they would be too embarrassed to be ashamed. Got that?
Yes.
They'd be too embarrassed to be ashamed. They wouldn't allow themselves to be ashamed of what they had done and then express that by asking for forgiveness and doing tshuva and turning, because they would be too embarrassed to do that in front of other people, because they didn't want other people to know that they had done the things that they're ashamed of doing. So instead they would keep it bottled up inside. They would never ask for forgiveness. They would never be able to unburden themselves and seek to change their life with God's help. And they would just continue to have that weight around them. So instead, let them whisper. Let them do it privately. Let it do it in personal reflection. And then they can accomplish that goal without having to be embarrassed by being in front of other people while doing it.
So that if sacrifices came back, there would be no need for the Amidah?
No, because the Amidah was still done prior to the end of the sacrifices, according to the rabbis. The timing of it was set according to the sacrifices, and certainly since the sacrifices are done, it is considered to be a substitution. But it would not necessarily prevent the sacrifices from either being done, or if the sacrifices were being done, from the Amidah from being done. The two could still be complementary, as they presumably were before the second temple was destroyed. All right, a little bit more on this. We're going to come back to the Olah and Chatat location in just a minute. So rather, next page. Sorry. I'm so well trained not to turn the page over.
Yes. Rather, say what pains him in a loud voice.
So it's not to his discredit, right? That is in a loud voice or a soft voice, right? It's what pains him should be said in a loud voice. What's in discredit to him, he should say quietly. But what pains him, he should say out loud. And here's the example.
And he shall cry out, unclean, unclean. He must make his anguish known to the community, so that the community will seek mercy for him. And anyone to whom misfortune happens should inform the community, so that the community may seek mercy in his behalf.
All right. So if you are ashamed of something, you've done something wrong, and you need to find a way to get forgiveness and to change your life, that does not have to be shouted from the highest treetops. But if you are in pain, if you are suffering, you shouldn't be ashamed of that. You should be seeking help from others. And to do that, they have to know that you're in trouble. You have to actually say something so that people will know. You know, your friends, the community, they're not mind readers. If you're going through some difficulty that could be helped by other people, or even at least receive the prayers of others, you should talk. One of the things that can be extremely difficult for many people going through medical problems is they don't want to tell anyone that they're going through treatment to this, or that they're seeking a transplant for that, or that they're having some limitations put on their life because of this condition. They don't want to tell anyone because they don't want to make their problems public. Well, that's certainly very understandable. And I can understand why people would feel embarrassed, but then how can you expect your friends or community to act like friends and community if they don't know? You have to give people an opening so that they can perform a mitzvah on your behalf, so that they can try to help, or at least be sympathetic. It's hard, I know, because we all like to present a perfect view of our lives to the outside world. It's one of the reasons why Facebook is so popular, because it's this curated view of our life. And you only put the prettiest pictures, you only put the happiest stories, you only put the most exciting events, and all the stuff that didn't work never makes it to the front page. Okay, but let's get back to our chatat and our olah. Remember, shock.
But doesn't Torah differentiate between the chatat and olah?
All right, because we said, as an aside, just a few sentences ago, that the chatat and the olah are done in the same place. Now, why would they be done in the same place? Why would that be something about sparing us embarrassment?
Because you don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Exactly. When you're standing next in line, and the guy in front of you hands over his animal, and the priest takes it to the altar and does exactly the same thing at the altar, as we're going to see more or less, that he does with your animal, you don't know whether the guy in front of you was doing an olah or whether he was doing a chatat. Right? The donation, as it were, is anonymous. It's unlabeled. You don't walk up to the gate with, adultery hanging off the ear tag of the sheep. So no one else knows why you've brought this sheep. Maybe it was for a sin, maybe it was for something that you're celebrating. They don't know.
So I know nothing about Christianity. When the Catholics have their confessional,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess people line up to go into that private booth.
Yes?
Everyone in line there, no one is going to say a good thing, right? It's all for bad things.
You don't usually go in to confess, I didn't do anything this week. Woohoo! Yes, so there is an awareness that everyone in line is, but there's also an awareness that everyone in line is.
So that's contrary to what the Torah is saying.
Well, it's mixed. For the same reason at Yom Kippur, when we all stand for Al-Chet and for Ashamnu, we all believe that everyone around us has sinned just as we have sinned. Well, maybe they had their own creative ways of doing it, but we've all have sinned sometime during the previous year. And when you're in the company of others who are equally acknowledging their transgressions, like in a line for confession or in a crowd at Yom Kippur, then there isn't the same embarrassment, because you're equally sharing your own shame for whatever it is you've done. But if the guy behind you is bringing a sheep because he's celebrating something amazing, and you're bringing a sheep because you've done something terrible, that creates a very different dynamic, and the potential for embarrassment becomes extreme.
How does the high priest know?
You tell him.
Okay.
You tell him. But we're going to see that there is a slight distinction, and the rabbis are aware of that. So,
There is the matter of sprinkling the blood. The blood from a chatat is sprinkled above the red line around the altar, and the blood from an olah is sprinkled below the line.
So the way the altar was made and the way the rituals were carried out, there was a difference between where the blood was supposed to be sprinkled on the altar. We're talking a matter of some inches here. But from where you were and where that was taking place, you didn't see that.
No.
Only your hairdresser, only the priest knew.
Only the priest knows.
Right? Only the priest knows. So yes, there is a distinction between the chatat and the olah in the way it is carried out. But
Does the priest know the specifics of your sin, or he just knows that it's a general sin?
no, there's a specific. You have to, when you put your hands on the animal and say that this is meant to be an expiation for whatever I did, you have to say what it is that you did.
Softly.
Yes. Yeah, you don't shout it to everyone.
The high priest.
But the priest who's officiating, it's not necessarily the Kohen Gadol. The priest who's officiating would know what it was, yes.
Do I have to read the next one with a straight face?
Yes?
But there is the further distinction that the chatat is a female beast and the olah is a male beast.
Okay, but so let's make sure we get the problem here, right? When you bring a chatat sheep or goat, it is a female, and when you bring an olah sheep or sheep, it is a male, and that would be a problem, right? Right? If I'm bringing a boy and you're bringing a girl, then I know mine's an olah and I know that yours is a chatat. But lo and behold, don't worry, God's got you covered. Ba-dum-bum.
The tail covers it.
The tail covers, right? If you're standing here and there's a sheep down there that's being led by the guy in front of you, are you really going to bend down and pick up the tail to see what it is? Now, does this mean that it's impossible for another person to figure out what your animal was for? No. They might have very good vision and be able to see exactly where the blood goes. They might peek under your animal's tail and see what gender it is, and so they'll know. What are the rabbis doing here? They're telling you shouldn't know. Because you shouldn't want to embarrass the other person. You should not be trying to expose their sins, their crimes, the things that they have done. Rebuke, yes, when it's possible to be done without embarrassment. Absolutely, you should help someone understand that what they had done was a mistake or what they did was wrong. You know, if someone comes to you and says, you know, oh, it was so nice last night, my husband got in late from work, and so it was already 10 o'clock, and we were just able to light the Shabbos candles before going to bed. As a rabbi, I would have to point out to them gently that, well, actually, once the sun has gone down, we don't light the Shabbat candles. And if that meant we couldn't do it before Shabbat began together, then whoever is at home would light the candles, and then you would enjoy the light once the other person is able to join you. But I wouldn't go, oh my God! What a sin that is! What are you, some kind of idiot that you don't understand? When Shabbat begins, you don't get to light candles. What, did you not go to Hebrew school? Were you not paying attention? I gave a sermon about this 2 weeks ago where you were That's not how you would rebuke someone.
Not so good.
Not so good. The upshot is the same. That you want to tell the person that you don't light after Shabbat began, even if it means that you don't get the light together. But you don't slap them in the face over it. You don't humiliate and embarrass them over it. You don't look under the tail of their lamb. You simply give the information in a way that will help them fix whatever the problem was without humiliating them. Because the humiliation is not necessary. When they realize that they have done something wrong, the shame of having made a mistake will come from within. They don't need you to help them feel that. They don't need you to embarrass them so that they'll regret their action. Knowing that they did something wrong once they finally have all the information or once they finally realize it, that will provide all the catalyst they need to regret their action. They don't need your humiliation to help them achieve that. So, let's finish it off.
But that only works for sheep. What about goats? In such a
Wait, make sure we understand this, because you don't bring a goat for an olah. Right? So you can bring a sheep or a goat for a chatat. You can only bring a sheep for an olah. So if you show up with a goat, then it's not going to be for an olah. It's definitely for a chatat. And the difference between... sorry.
The other way around, yeah.
Sorry. I'm backwards.
Okay, right.
Sorry, it's that's what happens when you're up too late.
Allah's the bad.
When you... it works for sheep because of the tail.
Right.
Goats, I don't need to look under the tail to tell the difference between a boy goat and a girl goat. Because you got these things called horns. And only boy goats got them. So there's no issue. It's not a problem of... it's not an insurmountable problem to identify the gender of a goat from just standing next to it. So if someone comes with a goat, I'm going to know that they're coming with a boy goat or a girl goat, and if it's a girl goat, they're coming for the chatat, and that means they've done something wrong. So doesn't that mean that then the Torah doesn't care about embarrassment? No.
Because in this case, it is the sinner himself who has brought on his own embarrassment. For if he had wanted to bring a female lamb, he could have done so, yet he brought a female goat.
Right? It's not Torah that made him bring the goat. That is easily identified as a girl goat. It is the person who brought the goat that is easily that has made the decision to bring an easily identifiable, or an easy gender to identify animal. How do you make an adjective out of that? An animal whose gender is easy to identify. English.
English, yes.
What's that?
Easily identifiable.
Easily identifiable, but how do you throw the word gender in there? An animal whose gender is easily identifiable. Yeah, and we speak this language all the time. At least I try.
They're trying to simplify the words on the SAT also. They're going to use.
I heard that, yes.
They're only going to ask you words that you would normally use in everyday language. They're not going to ask you those words that nobody ever heard of.
How hard can it be then?
Yes.
The average high schooler's vocabulary that I hear them using is not what I would exactly hope was their aspiration.
Okay, well, maybe not those words.
Yeah, maybe not those words. Okay. Okay. So we're going to see that this idea is reinforced in the next paragraph.
But as to the sin offering brought on account of idolatry, in which case only a female goat is suitable, what is there to say?
All right, so we've narrowed it. And notice this is the way the Talmud likes to wrestle with things. You make a statement, and it brings an opposing opinion. You refine it, and then you bring potential contradictions to that refinement, you find rebuttals, and then you find the perfect case that avoids all the rebuttals you've just had. And now we're left with, aha, says the smart aleck kid in the back of the room. But when you bring a chatat for idolatry, for avodah zarah, you don't get a choice of lamb or goat. It's got to be a goat. And it's got to be a girl goat. So everyone's going to know why you were there, that you brought this goat because you had committed the sin of avodah zarah. Dun, dun, dun.
In such a case, let the man indeed feel the embarrassment, so that it may attain atonement for him.
Okay. And now we're going to introduce the final concept of the day, which is that in certain circumstances, choosing to allow ourselves to feel embarrassment can actually be part of the healing process. Got that idea? All right. This is the only case in this narrow band where you are forced to do this. Where it's for bringing a female goat for chatat and the avodah zarah, for idolatry. That's the only case where the Torah makes you bring an animal that is going to announce to the world exactly what you had done. Everything else is easily hideable if you choose to hide it.
Just refresh my memory. Do I remember correctly that when a woman is accused of adultery, she's stoned?
No, when a woman and a man are convicted of adultery,
Right.
they are stoned.
Okay.
Yeah, not accused. The accused, you're thinking of
But here is the
the
man is admitting to adultery. He brings a sin offering.
so the difference between having been convicted of a crime or having confessed a crime can be big, depending upon whether or not there were witnesses or not. There's also a big difference about whether or not the act was done inadvertently. And so if you accidentally commit certain transgressions, when you recognize that you've committed them, you still have to bring an offering. You don't just say, whoops, accidents happen. It's, I should have done better to avoid the accident happening in the first place. So that may also be the circumstances that we're talking about here.
I don't know, it just seems a little strange to me that the man can,
Well, man or woman in this case. This word man is just generic in here.
a woman can bring.
If she committed avodah zarah, if she did idolatry as well, she can bring a chatat. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
When I was hearing man.
No.
I feel much better.
You-
Oh, yes.
Take the word man and just replace it with the word one. When one brings this because one has committed the transgression, it's just, I find it awkward to keep using the word one rather than at
As
least,
long as I understand it's
Yeah.
gender neutral.
yeah. This is gender neutral.
Okay.
I'm not happy.
The goat's not gender neutral, but the sinner is gender neutral.
Okay.
Here, the big distinction is avodah zarah,
Mhm.
idolatry, not spilling blood, not adultery. These are the three biggies.
Mhm.
And why is this one over those two? Number
I mean,
one.
why does this one have a sacrifice that goes along with it that is identifiable, and by that means it is something that is gaining further atonement because of the embarrassment?
Or why are the rabbis saying only about this, this one, that it's good to feel embarrassment, that's part of the healing process?
Well, with
It's-
idolatry, you have offended God. Not
But you've offended
You've
God
offended
when you
God.
murder someone too.
And when you
Well, that's
commit
true.
adultery.
Yeah, and any sin. There's a different focus, perhaps,
Yes.
that you were directly and exclusively betraying God with idolatry, but you offend God with every transgression.
That's true.
If offense is the right word, but yeah, you've definitely transgressed, and God is not approving of that action for any action. So I think the thing to try and notice here is that the sacrifice of the goat, the female goat, is what the rabbis believe is set by the Torah. It's not that they are singling this out, but having found that it is singled out, they are deriving a benefit from it. That is that, well, maybe embarrassment can help. And then they're going to bring, as we're going to see in the next text, a teaching that perhaps embarrassment voluntarily undertaken in other circumstances can have a similar effect. Because if you remember back when we first said, but that only works for sheep, but what about goats? Because you can tell a goat's identity very easily. That third but in the middle of the page. It says, but he brought it for his own embarrassment, meaning that you chose to do that yourself. So if you want, for whatever reason, to feel the embarrassment of others who watch you going up to the front of the Mishkan, you can bring a female goat, and you can let their eyes be on you and let them know that you are confessing to a transgression. And if that helps the process for you, that's your choice. But you don't have to for all the other transgressions. The only one where you have to is for this narrow one of idolatry, and that's simply because that's the way the rabbis believe the Torah says it is limited. To only idolatry is it obligatory. So we can talk about why did God make the goat rather than a sheep only obligatory for idolatry, but that's, I think, another conversation rather than the embarrassment one.
So sacrifices are no longer done.
Correct?
How do transgressors atone for their sins?
By confessing them before God and by making amends if you transgressed to another person, and through the process that culminates in Yom Kippur but takes place on a daily basis.
But it isn't as, I don't know if public is the right word, it's not as
Well, it depends.
obvious.
If I have humiliated you, since we're talking about embarrassment,
Right.
if I have to go to you and apologize and confess and atone for having done so, that's fairly public. And if you refuse to accept my apology, Judaism says I can bring other people with me to witness my confession to you and your refusal. Of course, we're hoping that you wouldn't refuse. So it does get more public the further you go down this chain of atonement if necessary. But yeah, it does start off as a private thing. And certainly if you've done something wrong between you and God that didn't affect anyone else, then it does remain a private thing, unless you would choose to use it as an example when talking or discussing with other people. So one of the things we're going to see, and we're running out of time, so I'm just going to make it explicit now, is that embarrassment is a choice. That's true in the modern world as well. We just pretend like it isn't. We feel embarrassed because we think it's an automatic response, but we choose to let the opinion of others matter to us. And oftentimes we choose to let the opinion of people we shouldn't be worried about matter to us more than others. And oftentimes we choose the opinions of people about our clothes or our hairstyle or the car we drive or the phone we use to matter more to us than their opinions about the other things we do. Like,
Oh, this is so important.
like-
Let's get to this.
like how we treat other people. So let's just go ahead and finish this up.
You want to continue
Yeah.
after with Abba Hanena?
Yep.
Abba Hanena, the elder, said in the name of Rav, whoever commits a transgression but is ashamed on that account is forgiven all his transgressions. For it is said that you may remember and be ashamed and never open your mouth anymore because of your shame, when I have forgiven you all that you have done, says the Lord God.
All right, so close reading, right? Close reading. You are ashamed, and I have forgiven all that you have done. So even if you are just ashamed on one transgression, God forgives all of them. Now, this is hyperbole, this is poetry. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing spiritual stock taking for everything you do. But it's trying to tell you that the internal feeling of regret, of how could I have done that? What a horrible thing that I did. I just am embarrassed internally that I ever allowed myself to do fill in the blank. Coming to that state of emotion, coming to that state of regret, wipes the slate clean. Does it mean you don't have to continue to confess and fix and make amends for all the other things you've done? No, of course not. You still have to do all the hard work too. But that emotional hurdle is massive for most of us. To truly be able to admit internally that what I did was wrong. Not just that I was upset that other people saw me doing it. Not just that I've lost friends from it, or I lost business from it, or I messed up my relationship with my family, and so that's made my life awkward. Not that I'm upset about the consequences. I'm upset that I did this. and it was beneath me that I did it. That emotional hurdle keeps so many of us from transforming our lives the way we have the capacity to. Because we don't want to admit that to ourselves. We don't want to think that what we did was truly wrong. We just made a mistake. Yeah, made a mistake. Feel bad about it. Own it. Get rid of it. And be ashamed that it happened. And by doing so, you set yourself on the path to take care of everything else that you've ever done in your life. Be able to honestly admit one true mistake to yourself and feel deep, deep regret, what's described here as shame, and all the others will fall into line. If you can do it once, you can do it again. But most of us don't even want to do it once with true contrition. One last text.
Regarding a goat, the Torah says,
We're back on the goat.
and the priest atones for him, and he is forgiven.
Oh, remember that sentence at the very beginning from our good friend Rabbi Yoshua, right? He was asking, why does it say that with the goat that he's forgiven for everything, but with the sheep it's just he's forgiven for the sin? Well, why is that? Here we go.
That is, since it does not specify what he is forgiven for, it implies that he is forgiven for all of his sins. On the other hand, regarding a lamb, the Torah states, and the priest atones for him for his sin which he sinned, and he is forgiven. He is only forgiven for the single sin for which he is bringing the offering, and not for his other sins, because by bringing a lamb, he avoided embarrassment.
All right, so Rabbi Yeshua is not trying to rewrite the laws of halakha of sacrificial offerings, but he's trying to draw attention to his community and for ours as well, that sometimes we go out of our way to avoid embarrassment and we make things harder for ourselves when it comes time to fixing our mistakes. Again, we're not talking about avoiding embarrassment by buying the latest fashion so no one laughs at you because you're not wearing the right clothes. We're talking about avoiding embarrassment when you should be trying to fix a mistake. And sometimes that makes things harder. We would have to bring multiple sheep, as it were, to fix all of the mistakes if we do it secretly. But you get it all out in the open, you just say, you know what, here's my goat. I did it. And that will trigger a release and an atonement for all the other actions in its process, in its wake.
What happens in the instance where a priest sees the same person making the same sin, bringing the same offering? Does the priest say, wait a second, you don't seem to understand what this process is?
This isn't a frequent flyer program.
Yeah.
It's not like you do 5 and we punch the 6th sheep free. It's, what's going on? The priest reflects on the educational model of their community. That is to say, if a priest were to truly see the same person committing the same transgression over and over again, then the priest should wonder, what are we not teaching in our community properly that this person continues to do this?
Or there's something wrong with that particular person,
And
you need
certainly.
to sit down and talk with them.
Absolutely as well. I mean, if it's... we're pretty sure that we've explained this very clearly, and it's not a mistake, then yes, you can intervene to try and help the person break that cycle.
Is that the role of the priest?
Absolutely. It's not the role so much nowadays. The Kohanim don't have that job, but it is definitely something that clergy still perform when people bring us their goat, and allow that. One of the things that's been eye-opening to me as a rabbi from actually having been ordained is how few people are willing to discuss their actual problems or difficulties with the rabbi. Much like Facebook, people seem to want to always present the best picture to the rabbi, and I don't want the rabbi to know that I'm having trouble with my husband or my wife, or that my kids are doing that, or that I don't know what to do about my mother who's aging and this issue. I don't want the rabbi to know all of that. And it means that, whereas I would like to be able to help, not that I have all the answers, but at least help some of the answers from our tradition to inform people who are going through this trouble, I'm often completely unaware of the issues until a very late state. And that continues to this day. I mean, it's human condition, I think, but it's been heightened in our contemporary society to avoid embarrassment at all costs, even if it means you carry the burden of guilt rather than letting it be released.
I think it's human nature that if we respect somebody as a rabbi, we want to present the best face And so we are less likely, perhaps than we should be, to share our problems.
And take that analogy to visiting the doctor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
If you
you
respect the
don't-
doctor so much, do you not tell them?
Yeah, there are people that don't.
And the doctor can't prescribe what you need.
Exactly, exactly.
And they say, oh no, I don't smoke and I never drink at all and I exercise 8 hours a day. And they go, okay, well then I can give you this medicine. Of course, this will react with alcohol, and make a
Yes.
deadly poison. And then the person has to go, oh, well, maybe I should have mentioned.
Right.
You got a problem. So, and it's the same with the clergy as well. You're not doing yourself or the rabbi or the doctor any favors by keeping those secrets.
Totally agree.
I don't need to hear about every parking ticket, but but other things that perhaps our tradition has thought of, because it's been around for 3,000 years and has tried to do this. Perhaps things can be shared that might help, or at least make it clear that that we're not alone in these problems, and that Judaism does want us to improve our lives rather than to castigate and embarrass us and cause us embarrassment.
So who was the genius who, when the Second Temple was destroyed and sacrifices stopped,
Mhm.
that said, we've got to transform Judaism to prayer, to concentrate on prayer, and try to keep this ritual?
The process had already begun prior to that, because the Second Temple, thank God, had already become corrupt before it was destroyed. So people were already looking for alternatives because they didn't have respect for the institution of the temple at that time. They still went and they still participated, but they were feeling spiritually unfulfilled because they knew what the priests were like, who were lining the pockets of Herod and of the Romans to have nepotism rule the day. And that kind of left a bad taste in the mouth, as you might imagine. So people were already looking for other spiritual expressions, and prayer was one that had begun a long time before, but was becoming more and more important at this time as an alternative. But if you want to read about who really triggered this and made it work, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the greatest rabbi most people have never heard of. He is the one that essentially saved Judaism from the destruction of the Second Temple. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Just read anything you can about him. It's amazing.
Be prepared, you're about to be embarrassed. I want you all to really take home the fact that you are so blessed with this man. A rabbi who was saying he hopes more people will bring their personal problems to him. This doesn't happen in Washington. That's not the reason. That's not the reason. This is someone who wants to help as a pastoral counselor, who is asking you to bring your personal issues to him. Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
are.
Yes,
You are.
it's true.
I'm a librarian. I'm a librarian. The reason I want this is only because I believe our tradition has the means to help. It's like being a pharmacist, and you got a whole shelf behind you of medicine that you didn't invent, that someone else invented, and you're waiting for people to come in so you can give them the medicine and say, well, you know what? I think that this from our shelf of wisdom would be helpful for you. It's not necessarily that I think I've got all the cures or everything, but I know our tradition does somewhere.
But
And
you're not just willing, you're asking for these kinds of interactions as a rabbi. God bless you.
Amen.
with that, I don't really have a segue to follow up. We will conclude for today. You left me without a segue.
And we leave in 2 days, so